Today I'm going to show you guys how to snap live multi-track drums to the grid, also known as time aligning drums.
True Sound Studios is in your ears.
Hey guys, what is up? I'm Weezna, and as always we're here at my studio, True Sound Studios, and today I get to show you guys how to snap drums to a grid. So I've been drumming for over 18 years, and it's pretty much the same time when I started a recording studio. And recently, as the DAW software has progressed, it has given me the option to be able to take my live drums that I recorded, my live multi-track drums, and then snap them or perfectly align them all the drum hits to a grid. Now there's a lot of controversy between snapping drums because you essentially take live drums with the human element that's not perfectly in time, and then you take them and you perfectly line them all up to the grid and then put drum samples over them. And some people are like, why don't you just program a drum machine to do the same thing? So that is a very valid point and is the reason why if a client comes to work with me, I give them that option. What do you want to do? Do you want to have really raw live drums and we won't do any time aligning? Or do you want to do some time aligning just on the things that, weren't the best in time? Or do we just do the entire track and kind of keep up with modern production techniques? So me in my studio, because I am a drummer and a producer and a mixing engineer, I really kind of get to make that choice every day. Okay, so let's get into this video and let me show you guys how to snap drums to a grid. Okay guys, so we got our multi-track drums here, and let's just go over real quick what I did. So with the overheads, I have the left overhead and right overhead in one stereo channel. So the reason I do this is when you record two separate channels, so let's say you had track 1 was overhead left, track 2 was overhead right. When you go ahead to quantize the two of them together, Cakewalk, sometimes the audio transient that it's trying to snap to is just slightly off from the left to the right. So maybe the overhead left transient comes in like 1/10 of a second early. And the problem with that is when you go to snap them, the transients aren't going to line up and it's going to try to pull them together, and you're going to get this weird stereo effect where it sounds like it's doing this ping pong thing. So I have found when recording the overheads to just do it in a stereo file. Make sure that both of the overheads are in phase with each other by checking the audio transients and making sure that they're just lining up really well. And this way, it'll just make this whole process a lot easier. So, and then after that, we have just a single kick drum channel, a single snare drum channel, a high tom, and a low tom. Now, I already went through and cut out all the noise in between the toms. It's just a preference of mine. I really just don't like having all that extra cymbal bleed and all the drums come through the toms. It's just something that I like to do. So another thing I like to do, and I find that it helps cut down on the glitches that happen, because every time we cut even one track, just one little drum hit, that is time stretching between those two drum hits, it's crossfading, and it's just a lot for the computer to handle. It's a ton of processing. So I found to minimize that, I go ahead and turn off all the plugins that I use on my drum channels. This really helps almost totally eliminate any of the possible glitching or errors that you might have while doing this. So it is very, very, very important that you recorded your drums to a metronome, and that metronome lines up with the project tempo. Now, the reason why this matters is because we're going to be snapping each and every one of these drum hits to the grid. So as you can see where the time marker snaps to, we're going to actually be snapping all of our drums to that. Okay, so let's get into this. So first thing I'm going to do is we need to select all of our drum tracks and we need to turn on the audio transients. So I'm going to very simply do that by selecting the overhead track, holding down Control, and this grabbing all of our drum tracks. And if I continue holding down Control and I go to clips, I can go down here to audio transients and click on that. And now all of our drum tracks have now audio transients on them. So before we go any further, let's just go ahead and listen to these drums totally raw, no plugins. And we're gonna have it play along with the guitar and bass. Okay, so as you can see, the drums, they're already fairly in time. I've been playing drums for over 18 years, and I've been playing most of that time to a metronome. So, the drums are fairly close to being perfectly on time. So obviously, if you do want those perfect time-aligned drums, this is what I'm going to show you guys how to do. So let's first go ahead and start with the overhead. So the overheads, unfortunately, are some of the toughest tracks to deal with because it's picking up the entire drum kit and cymbals, and there isn't such dominant transients on the cymbals, and you guys will find that it's going to be a little bit more difficult. But after you get through the overheads, it really does get a lot easier. So in the very beginning here, we just had just the hi-hats playing. I'm not going to quantize those. I don't really think that's necessary. But let's start right here where the snare drum comes in with that flam kick, flam. So right here, that's where it is. Cool. So let's go ahead and zoom in on this flam, because sometimes the audio markers, which are these white lines here, don't always show up. So this is a way you can add markers and also delete markers that are not in the right place. So right here, this second snare hit, it didn't pick it up on that flam. So if I go ahead and just hold down the Alt key on the keyboard and then left click, I can actually make an audio transient. Now, what I can do is I can actually just move these, and this is what I'm going to show you guys how to do. But first, we need to make sure that our audio transients are all set up correctly. As you can see right here, this transient moved a little further back than where the audio transient started from. So if I want to, I can go ahead once again and hold down Alt and create a new audio transient. And then over here, if I right click, I can go to disable. And now we've just cleaned up these transients here and make sure that they are firing in the correct place. And then obviously you can go ahead and do that for anything, as you're going to find sometimes it's just not going to just correctly put those transients in the right spot. Once again, we'll hit Alt to create a new transient right there. And it's often with things that are just really close together, like flams. Now, for example, right here, we have a kick drum hit and then followed by a snare drum hit. And right here, it made a transient where I'm riding on that open hi-hat. Now, since open hi-hats don't really have a super fast transient attack, it's going to sometimes mistrigger things like this. Now, I often just disable these. I find it kind of works a little better. And once again, if we go ahead back here, it's this marker showed up for whatever reason. There's no drum hit there, so we just want to get rid of those. So if we keep going through here, here's another one that we don't need. Just disable that. Obviously, you guys can go through every drum hit with extreme detail. I just want to show you guys the basis of how to do this. So now that the overhead track looks fairly good, let's get to the part where it goes from the chorus to the verse. This is going to show you guys some different transients. Okay, so right here, obviously we have a closed hi-hat. So what you guys will notice is it does a much better job at picking up those closed hi-hats. As you can see, it's not really misfiring. It's triggering on all of our hits. So this is really good because this is kind of like the easier part of the track, is when anytime it kind of breaks down and you have closed hi-hats, really makes it nice. Okay, so now that we have a good idea how to move a marker, disable, and recreate a new marker, now let's get into actually physically moving these drums around. So the first thing I always do is come up here to snap. You could keep it on, whatever you want. I like to do 16ths. It seems to work out pretty well in these average mid-tempo tracks. So we're going to start with the first hit where it comes into the verse. Right here. Okay, so let me solo all the drums. And obviously there's no high tom here because I cut that out. So let's go right here. So right here. This is the very beginning of the verse. So you can see these are all in slightly different times. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and left click and hold down and select them all. Now, because the kick drum is the thing that's actually leading this part, this is what I want to snap to. So what I want to do is just grab the kick drum track and I just want to snap it to the kick. So if I go ahead and zoom in, you'll see that the tom, the snare, and the overhead are slightly delayed, but our kick is right on time. And that's what you're going to need to do for all of what I call the dominant instruments. So if we go to the next part, this should be the snare is the dominant one. So this is our snare track. I'm going to move this on time. And if I once again go ahead and zoom in, you will see that the overhead is a little delayed and now the kick is a little delayed, but our snare is perfectly on time. So you would literally do that for every part. For an example right here, this is where I did a tom hit and a snare at the same time. Now for parts like this, it looks like our tom didn't trigger correctly. So I'll go ahead and create a new marker right there. So what I'll go ahead is I'll just grab everything but the floor tom and slide and just match it up with our snare drum. And I'll go ahead and just separately move that floor tom so that I get a good time align with this. See, it just kind of sounds better. Otherwise, our tom's gonna be slightly delayed, which is okay. I mean, that definitely does happen in the recording world, and that's actually how things are physically recorded. So that does work. That is really all it is. That's how you snap multi-track drums. So another way to do this is using the quantize tool. We could actually individually quantize each one of these tracks. Now this is kind of like how a drum machine would do it, where it's going to perfectly line up all the hi-hats, perfectly line up all the kick, snare, and toms, and so on. Now that isn't technically naturally how the drums are recorded, because if a kick drum has a mic close to it, by the time it reaches the overheads or even the room mics, there is actually going to be a time delay in there. But this is another way to do it, and maybe you will prefer this. Fortunately, this is actually a much quicker way to do it also. So what I can do is just go ahead and select a track. So we'll try the overheads here. And let me zoom out so you guys can see these transients moving. I'm going to go ahead and go up to process and then quantize. And then we'll do 16ths. I think 16ths will work fairly well, but just keep an eye on the audio transients in that overhead track. See, it moved everything just a little bit. So what it's doing is it's perfectly time aligning all those transients exactly to the grid. And then we could do the same thing for the kick drum. Go to quantize. Yep. Moved all those. And then last to the snare. We'll do that. And then you could do the same thing with the toms. Now, obviously, this is, some people would say this is like really cheating. You're pretty much just taking live drums and essentially turning into a drum machine. But every once in a while, this really does work, especially if you're going to put your overheads really close to your drum kit. This might work out well. So now if we zoom in real quick here, you can see that the overheads are perfectly snapped, the snare and the kick. So now everything is perfectly snapped to the grid. It's no longer just the dominant drum being snapped to the grid and there being a delay on that overhead. But now everything, including the overheads, are all perfectly snapped to the grid. Let's take a listen to what this sounds like. And then with the metronome. So, I mean, that does work and it does sound really good. It's just not the, really natural way of doing this. Typically, I use that first method where the leading drum is the one that's in time and I let the overheads, and often I have room mics and the room mics are even further delayed. So something with this method number 2, if you are recording with room mics, you're definitely not going to want to do that with the room mics. Because what you're going to find is that the room mics are going to be perfectly time aligned, and what makes it sound like a room mic is the delay. So this would definitely work better for a much simpler drum kit setup, where you just have a pair of overheads, kick, snare, tom mics, no room microphones. So the last thing you're going to want to do, and like I mentioned before, is because in between each and every one of these audio transient markers is essentially this has been time stretched and then cross-faded so that it all sounds great together, is you're going to want to process these. So what we're going to do is we're going to click our overheads, control, drag down and highlight these all again. And we're going to go ahead and go to clips again. So now it just looks like we haven't done anything, but what we need to do is select all these and go ahead down to bounce to clips. And it's essentially going to make all of those time alignment changes that we made and make them all permanent, mix it down so it's a solid audio file again, and it's going to be much easier for your computer to play these back and not have these weird glitchy sounds. So as you can see, this is definitely going to be time consuming if you use the method number 1, but it is really worth it. This is the way that everybody's doing drums now. I know it kind of makes them sound fake, and at this point it's like, should I use a drum machine? That's up to you guys, but at least you could go ahead and just time align parts that were maybe just a little bit more off than some of the other parts. So if you are a drummer or producer and you're trying to snap these drums, but you just still can't get what you want, or you find it's too difficult, I can snap the drums for you. We do everything via email, and you can just send me your tracks, and for a very reasonable rate, I can go ahead and snap and time align all of your multi-track drums for you. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you can use this information to make your drum tracks sound even better. So thank you for watching this video. If you guys enjoyed this video, click that like button and consider subscribing for more content. So not only do I make YouTube videos, but I also produce tracks, and I can mix and master your music. So once again, thank you for watching this video. I'm Weezna, and True Sound Studios is in your ears.